A cruel laugh cut through our living room like a blade, and it did not come from me. My mother-in-law stood over me, calling me a useless, empty woman, while my husband sat 3 feet away staring at his phone, saying nothing at all. Any normal wife would have screamed or broken down in tears right there on the carpet. I did neither. I lowered my head and agreed with every insult, letting them believe they had already won. What none of them understood was that 8 years later, my silence that single night would become the exact thing that destroyed both of their lives from the inside out. My name is Evelyn Hart. I trained as a registered nurse before I met Nathan Cole, and I gave up my career to run our home while he climbed the ladder at a large pharmaceutical company. I told myself the late nights and missed dinners were simply the cost of his success, comforting little lies that let me sleep at night. Right up until the afternoon, I found a photograph tucked inside his suit jacket while getting it ready for the dry cleaners. It showed Nathan laughing at an amusement park, a woman named Brianna beside him, and 2 small children sitting on their laps like they belonged there completely. My hands went cold, and my whole body felt like it had been dropped into ice water. For weeks he had vanished under the excuse of overtime and business trips, and I had believed every word. That evening I planned to confront him, but Nathan spoke first, coldly informing me our household budget was being cut in half because the company was struggling. It was a lie, and I knew it because his division had just posted record profits. He was not asking me anything. He was simply informing me the way you inform a servant of new house rules, and something in my chest did not break. It froze solid instead. The next day, I gently asked my mother-in-law, Diane, whether Nathan seemed distant lately, and she smiled the smile of someone who already knew everything. She reminded me that men have business to attend to, that a good wife stays quiet, especially one who could not give her son children. That single sentence told me she had already met his other family. A different woman would have called a lawyer that same week and burned it all down publicly. I chose something far more dangerous. I said nothing, and quietly began collecting every page of Nathan's mandatory executive health results, filing them into a locked drawer where no one would ever think to look. Life inside our house turned into something like a black and white film after that. Nathan treated me like hired help, snapping over meals and ironing, coming home smelling of perfume I never wore. Every autumn, the same thick envelope arrived from his corporate health program, and every year he handed it to me unopened, telling me to just put it somewhere. I carried it straight to that drawer and added it to a growing binder, reading the numbers with the trained eye of a former nurse, searching for something far deeper than high cholesterol. Something I prayed I would never actually find. 8 years into this quiet ritual, I sat across from Dr. Whitfield, head of genetics at Lakeside Metropolitan Hospital, the only person who knew the truth I carried. He asked, as he always did, why I kept bringing him a husband who refused to even acknowledge these appointments. I told him I was not there for myself. I needed to know that the children in that photograph, children who shared none of my blood, would be safe from whatever was hiding inside their father's genetic code. Because 8 years earlier, his blood work had revealed a severe hereditary condition, one that could strike silently once his children reached puberty, risking catastrophic organ failure if it went undetected. Nathan had walked out of that very appointment years earlier, annoyed at wasting his lunch hour, and never came back to hear the results. I was the only person who ever heard them, and protecting 2 children I had never even met became the quiet mission of my entire life. While Nathan spent his days laughing with Brianna over coffee, mocking me behind my back as a clueless housewife who never suspected a thing, he believed his life was flawless, completely unaware that his silent, discarded wife held the single most important piece of medical information his real family would ever need. Everything accelerated that 8th autumn, when a new letter arrived stamped in red, demanding an immediate follow-up. Nathan threw it across the table, calling it a scam, insisting his body was perfect. Diane blamed me for cooking him unhealthy meals and told him to simply throw the letter away, which he did without hesitation. I understood exactly what that letter meant. The clock I had quietly watched for 8 years had finally struck 0. The following week, convinced this was some paranoid scheme of mine, Nathan marched into Dr. Whitfield's office determined to shut it down and then meet Brianna for a celebration dinner. While he sat in that waiting room feeling invincible, Diane let herself into my house one final time, tossing a signed divorce petition onto my table and giving me until the end of the month to disappear with nothing but the clothes on my back. She informed me proudly that she had already met Brianna and the 2 beautiful heirs of the family, and that I was nothing more than an obstacle to her son's real happiness. I thanked her calmly for visiting and watched her leave confused by how unbothered I seemed. My clock had already stopped years earlier. Nothing she said could touch me anymore. Inside that office, Dr. Whitfield finally told Nathan the truth he had been running from. that he carried a genetic condition with a high chance of passing to his biological children, and without proper monitoring, the consequences could be fatal. Nathan tried claiming he had no children at all, forgetting he had legally acknowledged his 2 kids with Brianna years earlier through a formal paternity filing I had already discovered myself. Then came the blow that shattered him completely. Every single year for 8 years, his wife had walked into that office asking not about him, but about the safety of children who were not biologically hers. He ran home, desperate to seize my binder and twist the story into making himself the victim. He found me waiting calmly, the divorce papers and the binder side by side on the table. When he grabbed for the documents, I pulled them back and told him plainly that I had tried to warn him for 8 years, and he always told me to save my dramatic stories for later. His face cycled through denial and desperation before he actually tried arguing that since the children were never legally his, he owed them nothing. I placed one final envelope in front of him, his own certified paternity acknowledgement, and watched his last escape route seal itself shut by his own hand. His phone rang before he could even process it. Brianna panicked, screaming that their oldest son had suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest, the exact warning Dr. Whitfield had given him hours earlier already coming true. Diane, who had returned for a forgotten Tupperware lid, walked in on the entire collapse and heard everything. For the first time in her life, she turned on her own son, slapping him across the face and dragging him straight to the hospital to face the family he had been prepared to abandon only hours before. At the hospital, Dr. Whitfield explained to a devastated Brianna that the condition was hereditary from Nathan, and that the only reason doctors responded so fast was because someone had quietly kept the pediatric team prepared for years. That someone was never Nathan. It was the wife he humiliated, financially starved, and tried to throw onto the street that same morning. Brianna turned on him instantly, and Diane, disgusted, promised to fund her grandchildren's treatment herself while formally cutting Nathan from the family inheritance on the spot. By the time he dragged himself home that night, soaked and broken, he found the house dark except for me, standing by the door in my coat with a single suitcase at my feet. He collapsed, begging me to stay, promising to change now that everyone else had abandoned him. I told him calmly that no one had betrayed him. He was simply facing the consequences of choices he made entirely alone, choices I had spent 8 silent years working around just to keep 2 innocent children alive. Then I slid one final paper onto the table. A receipt proving the divorce his own mother had prepared was already filed and accepted. The weapon they built to destroy me had become the exact tool that finally set me free. I told him the house would be sold to cover his debts, that I was returning to nursing where I belonged, and I walked out into the cold night air feeling lighter than I had in 22 years. 3 years later, I was head nurse in the very pediatric ward where this all began, respected and trusted while 2 healthy, laughing children thanked me through their mother and grandmother for a life they never knew I had quietly protected. Outside, through the frost-covered glass, a man in a torn work uniform stood frozen, watching the warmth inside that he could never step back into. That man was Nathan, and the life he lost was never really about money or title. It was the quiet, extraordinary loyalty of a woman he never once thought to deserve, standing right in front of him the entire time. If this story moved you, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because The Revenge Tales brings you a brand new story of betrayal, patience, and justice every single week, and you will not want to miss what comes next.